In a perfect world, you would simply sit down and do the work. There would be no gap between intention and action. The only thing holding you back would be the time that it takes to get the result, the time that it takes to put the work in. In reality, there's a ton of stuff that stops us from crossing that bridge from intention to action, or thought to doing, or at least it slows us down. And it can be summed up by a word that we all know of: procrastination. Sometimes the reasons for procrastination are completely understandable. There are types of work, there are tasks that need to be done that are painful, that are emotionally challenging, and to pretend otherwise is to deny reality. But many times the procrastination that arises is a result not of the work itself, but how we frame the work, how we think about the work, how we advertise or market the work to ourselves in our minds. As Maxwell Maltz, the author of Psycho-Cybernetics, says, it's not the job, but the way we insist on thinking of the job that causes the trouble. For example, let's say that you need to get rid of an employee. You need to let them go. You've tried helping them perform better, but they simply aren't a good fit, and you know that you need to rip the band-aid off and get it done. It will be harder for you to do that task, if you're framing it in a negative light. If you tell yourself the story that letting go of this person will mess them up, it'll make them depressed, they'll hate you, then it's going to be a lot harder to take that action than if you were to simply reframe it in a more positive light, saying, this is the best thing I can do for this person and for this company. And I'm not responsible for what happens to them afterwards, because you're not. You can't take the responsibility of everybody upon yourself. And so by framing it in a different way, by saying this person is not a good fit, it's not fair for me to keep them on board, and there's no easy way to do this, but the right thing to do is not to delay it. You can see that framing matters. The narrative you tell yourself about the thing matters a lot. It also matters when you're trying to commit to some sort of big project, or you're thinking about it. Let's say, for example, you want to write a book. It's been sitting at the back of your mind for some time, but you want to get serious. You feel like it's time to actually get this done, because you're worried that you'll look back in 10 years having not done it, and you'll be frustrated and regretful. As soon as you start seriously thinking about it and getting close to that point where you've made the decision to commit, the doubts and fears enter your head. The frame begins to form. You think to yourself, what if I spend 2 years writing this book and no one reads it? What if it completely flops? What if it makes me no money? What if people do read it and they hate it and they hate me? And it's attached to my name forever. Like, my reputation is affected by it. If this is your frame and you don't do anything to mold it, to design it, then it's going to be very hard to make that commitment, because all you're thinking about are the negative aspects of that commitment. A powerful reframe would be to eliminate the downside, which is something we're going to look at later in this video. This is not deluding yourself and saying that everything's going to be perfect. You acknowledge the reality. You say, yes, I could spend 2 years writing this book and it could completely flop. Nothing is guaranteed. But then you acknowledge the hidden benefits and you start to reframe what you're dealing with. So you say, well, if I spend 2 years on a project like this, even if it flops, I'm going to develop an immense amount of work ethic, an immense amount of work discipline. My character is going to transform. I'm going to learn pretty much more than anyone else on this topic that I write on. And those things alone, those kind of intrinsic rewards, are going to be worth more than any amount of book sales that could take place. You take the idea that, hey, this book is going to be attached to my name forever and it's going to affect my reputation. And then you reframe that into, this is good motivation to not do mediocre work. I must not cut corners. The fact that this is attached to my name is good. It's good fuel. It encourages me to raise my standards. And so I'm grateful for that pressure. So those are two quick examples of what it means to reframe. It's looking at a situation, looking at a task or a commitment that you're about to make, and manipulating it to make it easier for you to overcome that threshold that is required to take action. A big question is, do you need to even do this? The answer is no. You do not need to frame all the time. Most work you do doesn't require this type of framing. You shouldn't be doing it before you start every task. You want to develop the ability to just sit down and do the work in a mechanical way. Because the person who can sit down and just write for 90 minutes is going to outperform the person who needs to frame or thinks they need to frame and reframe every time they sit down to write every morning. Framing comes in handy when you're stuck, when you're overthinking, when you're scared to make a decision, when you know that you're procrastinating on something, when you know there's a commitment to be made, but you're not making it. It's also helpful when you feel a lot of self-doubt about the path that you're on or a commitment that you've already made. Perhaps you're working on a book, you're halfway through and you feel like you should quit. Well, that's a good time to reframe and to manipulate what you're thinking about so that you can continue on the path and stay committed. Personally, I use framing for the big stuff. I don't frame my habits like my writing habit every morning, but the decision to write every morning comes from a certain frame. It comes from the frame of this habit is one of the highest leverage things I can do. Even if I don't feel like doing it, I should do it because it increases my luck surface area. Even if my writing doesn't produce any external results, it improves and clarifies my thinking, which is why it's one of the highest leverage things I can do. Therefore, I will do it. And so if I don't feel like writing a particular morning, or I start to feel like this is a useless habit, why am I even doing it? Then I just pull myself back into that frame. And so a simple rule of thumb here is that you should reframe a situation when it's challenging, painful, produces resistance, and you're facing immense temptation to procrastinate and just not do it. Now, I want to share 3 framing strategies with you. Before we do that, it's worth understanding, it's kind of as a foundational principle, that the better your state, the better your framing is going to be. At the end of last year, I committed to a big project, which I'm not going to reveal right now, but you'll learn more about it soon. And when I say committed, I mean I committed by myself. There are no partners involved. There's no real external pressures yet, but there will be. And so the cost of quitting is not immediately painful or high. It would be very easy for me to just quit the project. There would be some discomfort from people I've told who would ask me, hey, how's the project going? And I'd have to say, yeah, well, it's not going. Anyway, so I committed to this project in a state of high energy, of positive emotion. I was feeling good. I was motivated. I was energized. I was clear in my thinking. It was the right commitment to make. In the first week of this year, 2024, soon after I made the commitment, I woke up one day and I started doubting the commitment I've made. I started thinking, maybe this isn't the right thing to do. I started rationalizing why I maybe shouldn't do it. Doubts, fears, everything, right? It took me some time during this day, like a few hours, to realize that I was feeling this way. These doubts had entered my head because I had like 5 to 6 consecutive nights of poor sleep. I was tired physically and mentally. I decided that I wouldn't trust my own thoughts until I was well rested. And sure enough, that night or the night after, I got a good sleep again. I was well rested. I woke up, I felt good, and those doubts and fears were gone. They were replaced with a renewed sense of commitment and energy. And so when you find yourself stuck in negative framing, when you're looking at situations and you're looking at them in a negative light, or you're doubting things, or you feel like procrastinating, the first question to ask is, am I tired? Am I hungry? Have I moved? Have I exercised recently? Have I gone outside? Have I got sunlight? What is my state? Am I in a good state? And if the answer to that question is no, then you should be wary of what you're thinking, because fatigue makes cowards of us all. I forgot who said that, but it's such a great quote. This isn't to say that you shouldn't develop the resilience and force of will to operate even when tired. You should be able to do that because you are going to be tired and you just can't avoid that. You can't use bad state as a cope or good state as a crutch, but as much as you can, you want to make your state better so that you can frame things better and do the work more often and do it better. Okay, so we know what framing is. We know that we should reframe when things are tough, and we know that we should be in a good state. Now I want to share 3 framing strategies with you that you can practically use starting today. The first one is downside mitigation and asymmetry. One of the most powerful frames you can operate from is asymmetry, believing that the upsides far outweigh the downsides. And there's a way to do this. There's a way to frame things, projects, commitments in your head where it becomes irrational not to do the work. So if you think back to the book example I gave earlier in this video, if you're writing a book and you manage to reframe it in a way where success for you is doing the work, developing the character of the person who can write a book, learning a ton of stuff about the topic, if you look at those upsides and that's worth it to you, then book sales, the commercial success of the book, it's kind of just a bonus, right? And so by doing that, you eliminate a lot of the potential downsides that would come from another frame, where it's like, if the book doesn't sell, that's a failure. Well, no, it's not, at least not in this frame, because you can't fail if you've actually written the book. That is success. And so that frame is a way to create asymmetry. There's a few ways you can do this. The first is by operating out of the frame that the work itself is all you're entitled to. If you can get yourself to a point where you get intrinsically rewarded from the work that you do, regardless of the external results, then you are operating out of a very effective frame. The reason why is because it creates a huge amount of asymmetry, because you're already winning. Like if you sit down and you do the work for 3 hours, 4 hours every day, you've won. Anything else that comes out on top of that is a bonus, right? And you might be cynical and you might be thinking, well, yeah, that sounds cool, but the external results matter, like I need to make money. Like, yes, of course. But part of framing is about selling to yourself, about advertising, marketing to yourself, a different way of thinking so that you can operate more effectively. You kind of have to suspend judgment sometimes. You have to stop being so cynical and just frame things in a different way. So first, that foundation of the work itself is what I'm entitled to. The fruits of my labor are just a bonus. Second, you build into your frame the intrinsic benefits that come from doing the work, upgrading your skill set, developing your character. Even if the project fails, you've probably learned a ton of stuff, a bunch of lessons that you can apply to the next project. And so you're starting to build up this asymmetry while reducing or eliminating the downside. And I love this quote from a book called Win in the Dark. Doing the work guarantees you nothing except the opportunity to develop your character and skill set in ways you otherwise cannot. There's no promise that your training will pay off in the ways you think it should, but I can assure you it will pay off in ways you could never have imagined. A good question to ask yourself to get into this frame is, what are the non-obvious, non-immediate benefits that make this work worth doing anyway? So perhaps you're thinking of launching a service in your business, and to do that, you need to take a bunch of sales calls. You don't like taking sales calls. And so there's a strong temptation to say, we don't need to launch this service. We can do something else. Or maybe there's a different way to sell it. Well, ask yourself that question. What are the non-obvious, non-immediate benefits from doing this anyway? The answer to that might be, hey, even if the service offer doesn't succeed, the act of me doing 100 sales calls, which is something I haven't done much, is extremely beneficial because I start to develop the skill of sales, which will, pervade all these other areas of my life and business and will just make me a more effective human being. And that's probably worth it, even if the service itself fails. Right, the second reframe is to associate uncomfortable emotions with growth and success. Sounds a bit weird, but just hear me out. It is difficult to grow as a person unless you're uncomfortable. We all know this. You go to the gym, you want to build muscle, you've got to face discomfort. If you're lifting weights and it's easy, or it doesn't feel uncomfortable, then you're not lifting hard enough and you're not going to build muscle. We know this rationally, but we behave as if it's not true. The nerves that arise when we're thinking of committing to a project, for instance, often encourage us to work on something else, to avoid it, to do something easier instead. And so we foolishly mistake the discomfort as a sign to deviate and choose a different path. But often it's these exact emotions, the nervousness, the discomfort, the fear, that are signs we should be going down that path because it's going to provide personal growth. A reframe here is to acknowledge those emotions as they arise and then be grateful for them, knowing that you're on the path. And you can kind of observe them. Like I noticed the other day, I had a sales call for a potential coaching client, and about 30 minutes before the call, I felt a bit nervous. felt the nerves, and it's like, oh, it's been a while since I felt this way. And then I stepped back and I was thinking, this is good. I should feel this way more often because I know that discomfort is what I need to lean into to grow. Right? I talked about this in another video of mine, how to evolve in 2024, that you should lean into the pain, that is usually the signal, it's usually the marker on the map that you should move towards because it's where the most amount of personal growth is going to come from. And you might be thinking, well, yeah, but sometimes these negative emotions, sometimes the discomfort is a sign that I'm going down the wrong path. We're going down the wrong path. And it's like, yes, but you can usually tell the difference, right? You can usually tell the difference between the discomfort that comes from when you're working on the wrong thing compared to when you're working on the right thing. The wrong thing, it's like this low level anxiety. It makes you kind of depressed. It makes you very anxious, stressed. You just don't feel great. But over here, it's a discomfort that very quickly turns into acknowledgement of growth. It's like you do the hard thing, feels good, you want to embrace the discomfort, you know you're on the right path, it empowers you as you overcome it. Whereas when you're working on the wrong thing, you don't feel empowered, you just feel like you're on a hamster wheel. It's hard to articulate, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. You kind of know intuitively the difference between the two. Now, the final reframe, which is my favorite one of them all, and I have to give credit to George Mack for this, it's not my idea. I'll leave a link to the podcast episode. I think it was Infinite Loops, it was called. But he talks about the idea of reframing in terms of a video game. And there's kind of two ways to think about this. The first is that you ever meet someone who's lazy? You go to their house, it's messy, they haven't done the dishes in several days, maybe they're unemployed but shouldn't be, but they have no problem sitting down and playing a video game for 16 hours straight, like just focusing on one thing. It's like, well, why is that? Why can they sit down and do that? They should be lazy, right? I think the answer, at least that George Mack gives to that question, is it's because of the way the video game is designed. It is designed to be engaging, to give the dopamine hits at the right times, to provide the perfect ratio of challenge to reward. And while we shouldn't expect our work to be as engaging as a video game, we should think about the game that we're playing and whether we can design that in a more engaging way. One way to do that, which is kind of the second version of the video game reframe, is to think of your task list or the projects you're working on or the thing you're committed to as a series of levels. And so if you think of yourself as playing a video game in which there are multiple levels, there's not that much point in thinking about level 100 when you're only at level 1. You can't do anything about that. You're not there yet. You don't even really know what it looks like. Maybe you can look forward and see level 10. And so that's the next sort of big milestone. But to get to level 10, you need to go through level 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And so all you should really be focusing on is how to get to level 2 from level 1. This reframe is helpful because a lot of our anxiety and hesitation around work exists because we project ourselves so far forward into the future and then we start to overthink. I remember doing this a while back with my former business, the music production one. We were thinking about launching a coaching program and I projected myself forward and I was like, what if I'm so busy and I'm doing all these calls and blah, blah, blah. And I completely psyched myself out of doing that project, which was a terrible decision. It's very easy to do that. Whereas what I should have done is just reframed it as, hey, level 2 is just like building this. If I get to level 10 and I hate it, then I can quit playing that game and play a new one. But I don't know what level 10 looks like yet necessarily. So until I get there, I'm going to trust in the process and just work on levels 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth. And so we have this tendency to think too far into the future about how a project could fail or succeed instead of simply thinking about the next action in front of us. I'm not saying that you shouldn't plan. I'm not saying that there's no value in thinking forward. You want to be traveling down a path that makes sense, but once you have that path roughly in mind, there's little value in continuing to stay in that future state. You're much better served by focusing on the level that you're on or the level in front of you. Now, I actually do this. I stole this idea from George Mack again. I have this folder in Apple Notes called Execution. Got a few documents, right? And this is how I kind of do the reframe. Instead of having a task list, I do levels. So you can see here, I've got levels, right, under business in general. And it's like level 1 is to plan out all the levels, which George Mack talked about. He's like, it gives you that instant dopamine hit because you've achieved something. Level 2, I've got here, be consistent, work on levels 2 and 3 simultaneously. Level 3 is to ship the output. So you can see, like level 3.1, YouTube video by end of day on the 12th, newsletter and tweet thread, so on and so on and so on. And then what I've done is I've just got grinding skills. Like if you think of a video game, you're just grinding skills sometimes just to move forward in the game. And so for me, that is my reading and writing habit. I know that if I do that every morning, then I am going to progress in the game that I'm playing, no matter what. If I get those two things done. And so they're kind of like separate to all the levels. It's just like those happen no matter what. So try this out, like turn your to-do list into a levels list, right? Level 1, level 2, do some sub-levels in there and just start mapping out. It's like, how do I get from level 2 to 3? How do I get to level 10? So on and so forth. That's basically it. The 3 reframes are, first is to create a frame of asymmetry by recognizing that the work itself is the reward and then adding in, stacking some intrinsic benefits on top of that, such as development of work ethic, character, perhaps some learning that's gained by doing the project. The second reframe is to associate negative or uncomfortable emotions with progress and personal growth so that you can lean into them, acknowledge them, recognize that they're good things and they're probably signs that you're on the right path. Then the third reframe is what we just talked about, which was the video game reframe. Thinking of yourself as playing a game and the levels in between, and work through each one. And you'll feel much more rewarded than when you do it that way, as opposed to just like ticking things off a random task list. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please leave a comment below, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.